The Burgier, and Other Stories. By Júlia Rosell Saldaña. The Burgier. To see my eagerness for food, you only had to pay attention to my waist. He loved to eat. Everything got worse when, a block from my house, they opened a new hamburger restaurant. As a good neighbour, I decided to go and test how the meals were, as well as the owners and the place. I must say that my first visit pleasantly surprised me. A place decorated like the American 50s, everything immaculate, the smell of good food, excellent service, and a helpful and very humane treatment. And the best? Obviously, the hamburgers. When I remember the first hamburger I tried at Burger and Desire, my mouth is watering. I grabbed that soft but somewhat crunchy bread between my hands. I could feel the full weight of the ingredients and smell them as I brought them closer to my mouth. Bit by bit, little by little, the flavours melted. At the top, it started with the bread, followed by the fresh tomato from Montserrat, the glass lettuce, and finally the meat cooked to the exact point that seemed to melt in the mouth. In the lower part, on the other hand, it started the same way with the bread, but immediately the nuances of a sauce between mild and sour made their way to the red onion, which was mixed with a cheddar cheese that was topped by the meat. Thus, the two parts, upper and lower, merged with each bite, giving an explosion of flavour that was impossible to ignore. The hamburger was accompanied by French fries to the point of salt. I think if they had recorded me, I would have been on a TV show because of the faces I put on. When asked how I found the burger, I said delicious and detailed my taste perception in detail. I must have liked them because they brought me another hamburger just like it and told me that the house was on the house. Being a retired military man with a passion for food and nothing else to do, that restaurant became my weekly pilgrimage, as each week they made a different burger that was never repeated. On my second visit, the burger gave off a spicy aroma. When I tasted it, my taste buds began to dance. I could feel the mixture of a chimichurri mayonnaise with pico de gallo, avocado and Dijon mustard, chopped jalapenos, and Monterey Jack cheese, all softened by a marinated chicken meat with a mixture of cabbage, chopped purple and white. The burger was accompanied by wedge-shaped fries with a spicy and sweet and sour sauce. This time, they didn't have to give me any hamburger. I ordered 2 more for myself, so they gave me 2 servings of fries. It was about to explode. I paid and went home to sleep. That digestion was heavy but really pleasant. On my third visit, they set up a special table for me near the kitchen. The cook came out to serve me, and the hamburger he brought me was even more spectacular than the previous ones. It was a 300-gram beef hamburger, with good goat cheese and caramelized spring onion inside 2 hamburger buns rustically grilled. The hamburger was on a plate surrounded by matchstick potatoes that gave the image of a nest. While I was eating the burger with each bite, the waitress and the cook approached me and introduced themselves. I did the same. They told me that they wanted to change the menu and make a different hamburger every day, and that they would like me to try them first to give my opinion. It would have no cost, since they loved to see me enjoy myself as I did. Obviously, I accepted with great enthusiasm, and when I finished the hamburger, I stayed in the restaurant for a while talking to both of them at times. From what I understood, they had passed through several cities opening restaurants of this nature, which they later transferred and moved to another city to do the same. They didn't like being in the same place for too long. The next few days were spent going to see my new friends and trying out the new burgers. They made me come hours before opening time to make sure the burger met the expectations of someone with a sweet tooth like me, because if they had my approval, they put it on the menu the next day. Since I spent long hours with them, we started talking about our life and getting to know each other. Sometimes they said nonsense, as if they had lived a long life when they didn't look even 40 years old. I understood that they must be playing a joke on me. 2 weeks passed before I met the owner of the restaurant, who was happy to meet someone like me and praised my ability to enjoy gastronomy. He told me that he was invited to have dinner with them on a day off to try a very special hamburger, an invitation that I gladly accepted. He arrived on the agreed day, and I showed up at the back door of the restaurant where the waitress was waiting for me. I went in next to her and sat at the table next to the cook, her owner, and her. On the table were 4 hamburgers and fries. The fries were nothing to write home about, but the appearance of the hamburger was the strangest. Among the normal hamburger bun, you could see that the meat was purple and gave off a somewhat strange smell. The cheese was bright blue, the vegetables were red, the sauce was a phosphorescent green, and there was some kind of greyish mass that I didn't know what it was. Despite the strange smell, something in me was attracted to said hamburger. The other 3 diners looked at me, waiting for me to try it. When they saw that it didn't start, they began to eat theirs. So as not to offend you, I did the same. When I took the first bite, I got dizzy. Despite the normality of the bread, my lower part tore that meat that had a mixture of chicken and lamb meat flavour at the same time, while the upper part had found a texture similar to a thicker and more vicious mayonnaise. The vegetables and cheese were tremendously addictive, and the sauce was a spectacular touch. With each bite he took, and the more the flavours mixed, the more he wanted to eat that hamburger. I had never had any experience with drugs, but I figured it must be something like this, because I just wanted to eat more of it. I finished it without hesitation, and congratulated the cook, who was stunned by my speed of eating and swallowing. The owner discreetly asked me if I liked it, to which I replied, yes, it was the best burger I had ever eaten in my life. The waitress then asked if she hadn't found anything strange, or if she didn't creep me out, to which I replied that the important thing was the taste and that was divine. The 3 of them laughed, and even the cook patted me on the back. Immediately afterwards, the owner of the restaurant got up and approached me. He told me that that hamburger was the secret of their appearance, since they were over 100 years old, although they did not even look 40. I didn't take it seriously and asked if I could have another one, which made the cook laugh and go to the kitchen to prepare another, delighted to see me enjoying it so much. The owner asked me to get up to show me where those ingredients came from. I obeyed, and we went into the back room, where he showed me a box covered by a sheet. When he lifted the sheet, I could see that it was a cage. Inside it, there was a being that could be defined as the mixture of a baby elephant with a squid, which did not stop excreting different effluvia through several of its orifices. The owner approached with a knife and cut a bit of the ear of that strange being, which showed no pain. Within a few seconds, the part of his severed ear grew back. That made me think that what he had eaten came almost entirely from this strange being. A doubt ate me. And the vegetables? I transferred my question to the owner, who showed me a small automated greenhouse that was irrigated by the effluvia of said being. All the vegetables grew with that red colour. My host then asked me if I felt disgust, fear, or revulsion, to which I replied that he honestly didn't care about me, that he just wanted to enjoy the food, and that's what I did. That comment amused the owner, who immediately hugged me and asked if he wanted to join them on their travels. The only thing he asked me was to work with them in the burger joints they opened. Indeed, my answer was yes. The USB drive. I was studying at the university when I realised that someone had left a 256GB flash drive on the next table. I couldn't allow such a jewel to fall into the wrong hands, so I carefully approached and, making sure no one saw me, I put it in my pants pocket. At the end of classes, I went to my room in the student residence. I connected the flash drive to my computer, hoping to find something interesting. A 256GB flash drive can fit a lot of things. The Windows system told me that the pen drive was damaged, so I ran a diagnostic as recommended, and immediately I was able to open it. When I looked at the contents, my blood ran cold. They were all photographs of murders and violent deaths. It was the goriest thing I had ever seen in my life. I had to grab the bin to vomit. I unplugged the flash drive, broke it, shredded it as best I could, and threw it into the bin that contained my vomit, picked up the bag and threw it in the dumpster outside the residence. Those scenes made me feel so bad that I decided to stretch out on the bed and go to sleep. At night, a noise woke me up. I looked for the source and saw that my computer had turned on and the internet browser was changing pages randomly. I turned it off and went back to bed. The next day I woke up and the computer was on again. This time there were several of my university papers open. I thought it must be a virus, so I took it to a computer friend to check it out. But after hours he found nothing wrong and returned it to me. I ended up thinking that it must be my imagination, so I left the computer in my room and went to class. The day was educationally boring as expected, and at the end I returned to the residence to rest. When I entered the room, the computer was on, and there was a message that took up the entire desk. Throw the trash out the window and take a picture that I can see. Obviously, that must have been a bad joke, so I decided to ignore it and went with some friends to the nearest town by car to party. We started the night drinking in a bar where they put on a mixture of blonde and black beer that gave a strong and soft touch. At the same time, we also ordered several portions of homemade patatas bravas with the famous secret sauce of said bar. After several rounds, we went to the town disco, where we got lost between alcohol, dancing, and frustrated courtship rituals. I looked at the clock and it was already 5 a.m, so I told my colleagues to come back and go to sleep. They called me a spoilsport, but since we had class, they listened to me. I arrived at the residence and entered my room. When I looked at the computer, there was another message and a photograph on the desk. First notification. The photograph below the message was of a minor being raped by someone. I looked, and that someone was me. Clearly the image had been manipulated because I would never commit such a crime, but it was so well done that if the image fell into the wrong hands, I would end up in jail. After a few seconds, the message changed. Throw the trash out the window and take a picture that I can see. Drunk, confused, and scared, I grabbed the garbage can and emptied it out the window. With the mobile, I took a picture that I then sent via Bluetooth to the computer. Another message appeared. Thank you. Now, connect a pen drive. I listened and connected a flash drive to the computer, and the image I sent via Bluetooth appeared in the root folder of the flash drive. The computer suddenly turned off and I decided to go to sleep and pretend that it hadn't happened. Surely it had all been drunk. A horrible headache made me wake up. I was nauseous and felt like throwing up. I went to the bathroom and was woken up by a beeping sound from the computer. A new message appeared. Vomit in a bag and throw it to the first one that comes by. Take a photograph that I can see. I had such a headache and so much trouble thinking straight that I just obeyed. Despite the victim's complaints and a complaint that would lead me because of my attitude, I complied with the request, and after sending the photograph via Bluetooth, it appeared on the pen drive that I connected. Another message appeared on the desktop. Thank you. Then the computer turned off by itself. After a few minutes, the knocking of the door resounded throughout the room. Someone was demanding my attention. I moved with difficulty, due to the headache, to the door and opened it. There was the victim of my vomit, with a recognizable and understandable angry face, who punched me in the nose that made me bleed. I fell to the ground and got spit in my face as a tip. When I managed to stop the nosebleed and clean myself up, I went to class. The day was hard due to my hangover, but it ended with no more setbacks than a written complaint from the student residence. I wasn't feeling well, so I decided to spend the rest of the day in bed. How could it be otherwise? A beep emitted by the computer interrupted my rest. Another message on the computer appeared. Get a knife, a towel, a stick, and a lighter. Take the photograph that I can see. I was in no condition to think or argue with a computer that could land me in jail, so I went to gather the materials and, as in the previous cases, I sent the photograph to the computer. A new message appeared. Cut off your little finger. Take a photograph that I can see. That was already too much. Was it worth avoiding jail? What was happening? Who was behind this practical joke? I wrote on the computer below the message, no. In a few seconds, a new message appeared. Second notice. Several photographs worse than those of the first notice were generated. The mail program was opened, and these images were attached. Seeing that the threat was serious, I took the stick and put it in my mouth, pressing it hard between my teeth. With the knife, I severed my little finger and then cauterized the wound with the lighter. The pain was unbearable and I started to cry. I took a picture of my hand and little finger outside my body. I sent it to the computer in the same way as the previous ones. A message appeared. "Thank you." The computer suddenly shut down and I ran to the infirmary with my little finger in the towel. Shortly after arriving, I passed out as I couldn't stand the pain anymore. When I woke up, I was in the town hospital. I couldn't feel my hand, and when I looked at it, I saw that my finger had been sewn up. He was bandaged and a line came out of him, but I could deduce from the difficulty in moving him that he was not at his best, and that the appearance must have been horrendous. Shortly after waking up, a nurse came to do some cures. She asked me what had happened, and I told her that I had a little accident on campus. He must have noticed that I was lying, because after a while a psychiatrist came and questioned me. I had to keep lying for them to let me go. No one was going to believe me about what was happening with the computer either. After 2 days of observation, I was able to leave the hospital. Medication was prescribed for the grafted finger, and it was recommended that I go to a physical therapist to recover the mobility of the finger. When I got back to the residence and to my room, it was night. There was the damn computer. It was on and there was a message on the desktop. "Kill a neighbor and take a photo I can see." I couldn't anymore. I grabbed the computer and threw it out the window. I could see from my window how it broke into 1,000 pieces, and the flash drive was fired. After a while, my cell phone rang. When I looked at the screen, there was a message like the ones from government emergencies. "Kill a neighbor and take a photo I can see." How could it be her? The situation was beyond me. Below the message were 2 options. Yes, no. I pressed no and a new message appeared. Third notice. Reporting crimes to the police. I ran out of the room, desperate. I thought I was going crazy. I ran to the door of the residence and saw under my window the computer in pieces. A young woman passing through the area picked up something on the ground. I deduced that it was the flash drive, so I went after her, yelling not to take that demonic device. The girl got scared and called the police while I tried to explain to her, out of my mind and shouting, that that flash drive would only cause her problems. Within seconds, I was on the ground, pinned down by campus security. A teacher came over to calm the young woman down while I kept yelling that the flash drive was cursed. I tried unsuccessfully to extricate myself from campus security, who waited for the police to arrive. When the police arrived, they informed me that I was being held for several serious crimes, as they had received incriminating graphic material. I tried to explain to them that it was all the fault of a flash drive, that I hadn't done anything. They didn't listen to me, but it was all the fault of the flash drive. The clock. I was locked in my house. This house had been in the family for 5 generations. My favourite room was the drawing room, where a 19th century clock stood impassive and watchful. It was of sufficient quality that only 3 repairs had been required since he had been home. I sat on the couch while I thought about how to end the confinement in my own house. When I realised the clock struck 12, I no longer knew what to do. Boredom overwhelmed me and I needed to get some fresh air. I went to the kitchen. I tried to open the door that led to the garden, but it did not open. I tried with the windows and the same thing happened. I went room by room trying to open windows. I went upstairs and the same thing happened. Finally, I went to the entrance of the house to open the door, but it did not allow it. I began to feel claustrophobic, afraid, helpless. I couldn't open any of the windows or doors. It was impossible for me to go outside. The clock struck 12. I decided to give up and go back to the chair to rest my head a bit. The TV didn't work. The internet didn't work. The computer didn't work. The phone didn't work. The computer didn't work. Didn't anything work at home? I felt like an animal trapped in a luxurious cage from which I could not get out, and from where all I could do was dream of the outside. The more laps he made, the less sense he found in the situation. He had no access to the outside or to information outside the house. I looked out the window and only saw that a thick fog that only let me see a small part of the garden. I felt alone. Absolutely alone. I went back upstairs and looked out the windows. The same situation. A dense fog prevented seeing beyond a part of the garden. The clock struck 12. I decided to go to sleep. Mental exhaustion was such that I didn't feel like doing anything. I dreamed of abstract things that I couldn't make sense of. I woke up after hours in a cold sweat. I went to make myself a coffee in the Italian coffee machine and took out some pastries stuffed with jam to accompany. I finished breakfast and went for my father's old typewriter to entertain myself, with which I wrote poetry for hours. When I got tired, I went back to the armchair to be comfortable. The clock struck 12. One moment, the clock only struck 12. I looked at the clock and saw that the hands were exactly at 12. Although the second hand moved correctly, the others did not move. Maybe it would have been damaged, I thought. So I opened the watch, took it apart, and checked that there wasn't something strange that prevented it from working properly. But the most I saw was a cobweb that I cleaned. 12 o'clock, something in my head clicked. Why was that hour so important to me? Why at 12? My head began to spin. I was forgetting something important. I tried to remember what it was. I tried to think about what I had forgotten the most. It only made me dizzier. I sat back in the chair, thinking, pondering, and turning over that missing puzzle piece that made me feel crazy. When the clock struck 12 again, I remembered. I got home, made myself an infusion, and sat down in the armchair to drink it. Suddenly, my chest felt heavy. I suffered a kind of horrible indigestion and fell to the ground. The next thing I remember is that everything was black, and I couldn't move until after a while, I was sitting on the couch again. I looked towards the chair, and at its feet I could see my body. The cup of infusion was next to me with all the contents spilled on the carpet. Had he died? Was dying? Had time stopped for me? I approached my own body, trying to get it to react, but I went through it with my hands. There was no further explanation. I was no longer part of that world. I had died, and for some strange reason, the clock always struck 12 while it was impossible for me to leave the house. Remembering all this gave me a strange feeling of peace. I felt calm, and both the fear and the claustrophobia disappeared. When I felt that peace, the clock stopped ringing, the hands stopped, and the door of the house opened. Through that door entered a warm and precious light that gave even more peace. I think I just had to come to terms with my death. The pill. I had been having trouble sleeping for months. Despite all my attempts and going to specialists of all kinds, the problem continued. One day, an acquaintance told me about a drug that could be the solution. He had always been reticent about drugs, but given my current state of health, in which discomfort, pain, and illness were fed by lack of sleep, I decided to give it a try. The first time I took the pill, I fell into a deep sleep that I didn't remember anything about, and I woke up fully recovered. In 3 days, it was like new. If he had discovered that drug before, surely now it would be working as before without any more problems. On the 4th day of taking this pill, I began to see things, abstract, floating shapes that went from one place to another. Sometimes I felt the touch of things that did not exist or that were not there, while other times I felt the air currents that moved. I started to worry when I saw those things 24 hours a day, so I decided to see a specialist. I talked to him and explained about the drug. He asked me to give him one of the pills for his study because he did not know what drug could cause hallucinations of that nature. He gave me an appointment for next week, and we agreed that, in anticipation of a potential onset of psychosis, I would take mild antipsychotics to see if it would end. The following days, and despite taking antipsychotics, the visions of those beings and things persisted. In addition, the lack of the drug caused me horrible insomnia again. I waited patiently to go see the specialist and got through the days as best I could. My next visit to the specialist was very strange. That calm and collected specialist was now someone nervous. He told me that what he saw were actually beings on other levels of existence, and he was delighted with the drug. He recommended that I stop taking antipsychotics and enjoy the experience. He took it to be able to communicate with those beings and even enjoy the experience of experiencing other dimensions. As expected, I thought he was crazy and stopped going to the specialist. I stopped taking the antipsychotics and tried to get back to my normal life. It didn't take long for me to fall back into a spiral of discomfort and pain, insomnia and mental disturbances, so I was back on the drug. The tolerance rate that I had developed made me require more to be able to sleep, while the visions and sensations increased. There came a point where my mind seemed to free itself from any bondage, and my senses fine-tuned to a point where the slightest touch felt like a strong grip, but nothing annoying. Those things that I saw gradually gained definition, and I realized that most of them were like amoebas and jellyfish, with no other purpose than to exist. They moved, looking for food, floating in the air. As time passed, I saw more strange beings to the point that one day I could clearly see a humanoid being who was as surprised to see me as I was to see him. We spent days trying to communicate by signing and even looking for ways to teach each other our respective written languages to make communication easier. If these were hallucinations, they were the best and most realistic since my college days on LSD. Every day she was more euphoric and had less need to eat. The night breaks to sleep were wonderful, and he even dreamed that he had wonderful times with that humanoid being. It didn't take long for the real reality to become boring, and even my surroundings seemed grey and insipid. I just wanted to keep enjoying those new experiences under the influence of the drug. One day, looking at myself in the mirror, I realized that my appearance was more like that of a humanoid being than my own. I was worn and thin, I looked sick and weak. When I realized it, my biggest desire was to sleep, and I could do it for about 14 hours a day. My life now focused on sleeping almost all day, living experiences out of the ordinary, experiencing reality as if it were a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract, leaving aside 3-dimensionality just to keep my body alive. Little by little, I learned to manage myself in an environment that was not explainable in a 3-dimensional environment, and I decided never to wake up. The coffee. Bitter morning drug that keeps 3/4 of the West awake. What would I do without you? After all, you are an infusion, but you combine with so many things. I love your aroma and your taste. You let me have days full of energy and productivity. Did you know? I found that mixing it with pure cocoa and a little chili in the Italian coffee pot gave me a lot of energy. Nobody would have expected that my love for you would cause me to set up a coffee shop. Nobody would have believed that I could be so successful, and my mixes would become famous wherever my coffee shop was talked about. The best-selling coffees? The Santos from Brazil, a soft coffee, full-bodied and with just the right amount of bitterness and acidity. The Excelso de Medellin, with a lot of body and low acidity. The Tapuza from Costa Rica, soft and slightly acidic. Ethiopian mocha, with a stale but pleasant taste. The Jamaican Blue Mountain, the purest and most expensive of the collection, with a lot of body, flavour, aroma and slight acidity. The Java, Menado with a smoky and slightly chocolate flavour. The Kenya, with a rich aroma, strong flavour and high acidity. The Mysore, reminiscent of wine for its body and flavour. Nicaragua with 0 acidity and perfect for mixing. The Sumatra, with a strong flavour and little acid, and to finish the Tanzanian Kilimanjaro, with a very different and balanced taste. Every coffee drinker is welcome to my place, and I make sure that they leave satisfied and, if possible, without any tachycardia. For neophytes, there is always the option of asking them how they like their coffee, and that is how we select it. Strong or mild, acid or not, bitter or not, blended or not, smoked or not. The possibilities are endless and the ways to prepare it also. Now the style of making Japanese coffee has become fashionable, where making a pot of coffee becomes a long ritual that leaves an incredible flavour in the cup and on the palate. Despite being a cafeteria, we open until late because we have enough endurance. Even more so, there are customers who come to taste the nightly mixes that we make. Yes, even very interesting people who profess strange cults come. They are the best customers, the ones who leave the most tips, and, above all, the most gourmet. Before you came, without going any further, they made us a request for a coffee that was chocolate and somewhat salty. The client wanted the perfect contrast on his palate. We decided to use a 100% Swiss chocolate along with Himalayan salt. We grind both ingredients until we obtain a fine powder, monitoring the temperature of the grind as well as the environment to avoid inappropriate mixtures or the melting of the chocolate, and we proceed to prepare the coffee in a special coffee maker for these cases. If she had seen the customer's face, she would have felt like a proud mother to see her child eat something new and delicious. Anyway, excuse me for everything I've told you, but I wanted to give you some background information so that you can see to what extent we take our clients' requests seriously. Although, I know you came from them, right? Don't worry, I can assure you that we treat everyone very well, even the ingredients. In your case. As you may have been told, we are interested in your blood due to your diabetic situation. Yes, we know about your common disease, as well as what you have that is not so common. We know that their blood has a very special flavour and we would like to incorporate it into our most gourmet mixes. Come on, I'll personally make sure you don't miss a thing while we take care of drawing your blood for special clients. The 3D printer. Ever since they first appeared, I fell in love with 3D printers. So many had passed through my hands that I lost count. Over time, I ended up dedicating myself to it full-time as a professional field, and I made prototypes, prostheses, ultrasounds with relief, inventions, molds, figures, 3D scans. There was a day that I couldn't be there, and I brought a 3D food printer from the US called LA Cornucopia. That printer fed on some tubes with which it could make some delicious dishes, including lasagna. I got so used to that printer that I lost my taste for cooked food or going to restaurants. My business was booming, and my belly was growing along with it, until one day I noticed a strange taste in the steak I made with the printer. When I looked at that steak, I saw that it was moving. I contacted the technical service of the printer, and they sent me another one. I put both of them to work on the same thing separately, and while in mine they came out strange shapes, in the new one, everything seemed to go normally. The plates that came out of mine seemed more like a disgusting twisted painting, an abject version of something that should be beautiful and delicious. I had a printer next to the other, and over time I stopped using the old one because I didn't trust the prints, especially if I had to eat them. Everything changed one day when I saw that some tendrils came out of the old printer through the extruder and went directly to the plate of the new printer. That wouldn't be important if it weren't for the fact that they started printing on their own. I don't know if out of stupidity or curiosity I let them work. They were both printing abject things with the organic base of the food they were supposed to print. I had no choice but to go back to the old convenience food or go to restaurants as cooking was not my thing. The next day I was horrified to see that the kitchen floor was littered with those disgusting creations. I couldn't help but vomit at the sight of them, for they crawled and wriggled, moved sideways, slowly losing their substance with each movement. That more than food seemed severed parts of the body of a zombie with no other purpose than to move. It was the most unpleasant sight of my life. I contacted tech support again but got no response. Searching for information, I learned that the company had gone bankrupt due to several lawsuits related to malfunctions. It got to a point where the kitchen was unusable and I had to board up the door. Despite cutting off the light in the kitchen, those infernal machines continued to work. At night, strange noises could be heard coming from the kitchen. I could even hear what sounded like voices. Scared, I went down to check if something had happened, but what I found was even worse. A humanoid-looking being, malformed, that looked more like a leper, approached me while trying to utter words, but only gasped and randomly could understand some letter. He was so horrified that he didn't know what to do. Perhaps that being was alive? How could food be alive? Would anyone be able to eat that? Those questions tormented me so much that I was paralyzed. The last thing I saw was that strange being clinging to my legs and merging them to him as if it were molten plastic.